Okay. So you're looking at the base level of the screen. You're not really into the program at this point, okay? But all you have to do is just come over here to this area and click on that plus, and that'll begin a new session for you. So if you have AutoCAD open and you'd like to do that, that would be great. So this is our graphical user interface, okay? Is everybody seeing that okay?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So let's start it. We're going to look at the different parts of the screen, give them a name, and show you how they function. And then we're going to start to get into some of the different aspects of what we're going to be doing. And tonight, I'm going to actually deal with a couple of the draw commands so that I can get you started into a project actually. Okay. So we're going to start over here at the top part of the screen over here with this big A. And this is called your application menu. And it's basically file handling types of menu. So if you open this up right here, you'll notice when it drops down, what you're seeing are commands that are associated with files. So handling files, saving files, closing files, those kind of things. So if you had a connection to a plotter, you could also do a print here. Unfortunately, we won't be able to do that, but if you have a printer at home, you can do that. And I'll show you next week how to do that, okay? So that's your application menu. Right next to it is this area. Right in this area, it goes from that icon over to where it says drafting and annotation. This is called your quick access toolbar. And basically, it's got the same information that the application menu has, okay? Now you can customize this and put a few more things in there. And that's what this little drop down arrow is for here. That allows you to add or delete certain things into the menu, okay? Quite frankly, most of the time I do a lot of the commands that I'm gonna do here because if I'm gonna save a file, I can save it right in here as opposed to going over here and doing a save. So, you know, you're gonna have a lot of duplication of locations of where files and where things are in AutoCAD. So there's usually 3 or 4 different ways to get to every command. And that takes a little getting used to at first, okay? All right. Moving across the top. Anybody have a question?
No.
Okay.
Are we going to need to print anything at all?
No, because I'm going to grade your drawings based on your digital file submissions. So yeah, you won't have to worry about printing. If you want to print something, I'm going to show you guys how to do that, because if you have a printer at home, it's really nice to print out a hard copy, particularly because you'll find you see more mistakes when you print it out than you do when you're looking at the screen. I do that constantly. But
Now, can you save it to a flash drive and then print it? If
you
have
absolutely
to print somewhere
can,
else?
but if you're going to save it to a flash drive, you're going to have AutoCAD to print from, okay?
Oh,
So,
okay.
yeah, you can save the file. It's a really pretty small file, actually, unless it's a really, really complex drawing, which we will not be doing anything very complex. But you have to have the AutoCAD program or a program that would print out an AutoCAD file. And I'll show you another little program you guys might consider downloading. It's also free through their webpage as well, because you can print from it and you don't need to have AutoCAD actually. Okay, so that's a great question. So right here where my cursor is, where it says Autodesk 2020, on the other side of that, it'll show you the name of the current drawing. And so right now, I think it just calls it Drawing 1 or Drawing 2. And eventually, when you save that file, it will give it the actual name. So, but you may notice it has a .dwg. That's called the extension. That is the file type that you're working in. Okay. And so AutoCAD can only open what's called a .dwg file. That stands for drawing file. It's proprietary to AutoCAD. And that is the file type that you'll be sending me. Okay. As we go across the top over this area right here, this is called your information center. And the information center is where you can search information. they have a pretty good help screen in AutoCAD. So if you're looking for a particular topic, you can just click up in here, type what you're looking for, and it's nice. It'll find it for you very readily. Okay, so that's a good feature to know as well. All right, so we're going to go down and we're going to drop down into this area right here. Okay, and this area is where most of our actions are going to happen, where you see most of the commands. This is called your ribbon, and your ribbon is broken down into what are called tabs. So notice there's the Home tab. When I click on Insert, it goes to the Insert tab, Annotate. So all of these are commands that are associated with that particular topic. Okay. And when you go to a particular tab, you'll also notice that there's areas that are broken out here. Draw, Modify, Annotation. Those are called panels. So panels are groups of commands that kind of do the same thing. So the Draw panel has little draw tools, lines, polylines, circles. We go over to the Layers panel, and this deals with something called layers. Okay. Does somebody have a question? No? Okay. So also you'll notice with the panels, sometimes they have a little down arrow like this one. That indicates that there's more. It's kind of like a drawer that pulls out that has more tools in it, okay? So those are your major tools, and those are additional tools, okay? If you see an arrow that kind of points southeast like that, that'll usually send you to what's called a context-sensitive ribbon, or it might open up a dialog box. If I pick on that, it opens up this guy over here. This is a dialog box. So that's a different kind of aspect of the menu. Okay? Good so far?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So you may notice up here in the quick access tool area, we are working on a particular workspace that's called drafting and annotation. And that's why this ribbon looks the way it is. So it's a set of tools that are set up for doing just straight two-dimensional drawing. If you open that up, you'll notice that you have other palettes there, 3D Basics, 3D Modeling, or you can create your own customized ones. So for instance, if I switch this to 3D Basics, notice my ribbon gets recompiled, and all of the tools now are based for three-dimensional types of applications, okay? It's kind of good to know that, because sometimes you can corrupt your ribbon or corrupt your tools, and all you need to do is just go generate the one that you want again. Usually that'll fix it. So notice that takes me back in business at that point. Okay, is that good?
Yeah.
Okay, all right, so let's go down to this area right here where you see my cursor floating around. This is called the graphic screen, or the graphic area. This is basically your piece of paper that you're working on. And it actually is more like a cube of space, because in AutoCAD you're working three-dimensionally always, although everything we're going to be doing is 2D. So right now you're locked into a plane at a 0 level, but you basically can go into the screen or out of the screen as well. Okay. You also can work pretty much infinity in all directions. So you have the X direction, that's the X positive, going X negative. This is the Y positive, Y negative. Positive Z would be coming at me. Negative Z would be going into the screen. Okay, but again, we're not gonna have to worry about that too much. All right, so this is where most of our drawing, this is where all the action kind of happens, right down in here. Okay, so we'll be spending a lot of time with that. You'll notice a couple of little things that are also associated with this guy. Over here, this area, this is called your view cube, and it's primarily used for three-dimensional kind of work. But it will do things like rotate your drawing. So notice I can rotate it and should have rotated. There it goes. So you notice now the X is pointing up, the Y is that way. So be careful with this. I would kind of stay away from it actually. And also make sure that it always says top here. Because if you kick this out, notice if let's see if I can get this to work for me. There. So now I'm in more of a three-dimensional view, okay? And so we're going to be working three-dimensionally pretty much always. So I'm going to go ahead and bring that back to top, okay? So, okay. This little guy over here, this is called your UCS. Stands for User Coordinate System. And it's the User Coordinate System icon. And what he's showing you is the direction of positive X space, which is in this direction, positive Y space, and positive Z. Somebody have a question? Does somebody have a question? Sorry.
No.
Okay, all right. So this is what they call a virtual object. It will never print on your drawing, but it's very important when we talk about coordinates. So be careful with this thing, because if you click on it, notice these little blue grip boxes. I can move this thing and I can rotate it, and you'll notice that my grid rotates with it. So what that can do is mess up the coordinate system that you're started in and create actually a new one. So we have to be really, really careful with that thing, okay? And we'll talk about that guy a little more, because we're actually going to use him when we get into this. So I'm going to change him back to a normal view, okay? Also, at the top here, if you're never sure whether you're okay with the view cube up here, your best bet is to just go over here where it says top. Make sure it always says top. Make sure it always says 2D wireframe, okay? So just make sure that's always top and that's always 2D wireframe, all right? Okay, another couple areas here, and then we can get started with some things. This guy right here is pretty important in AutoCAD. This is called your command line or your command window. And it's a floating window. So you'll notice these dot patterns over on the side. If you left click with your mouse, hold it down, you can drag this thing wherever you want. Most people dock it. So what that means is they'll bring it down to the bottom and bring it like that, okay? Which is the way I usually place it. So what that thing is for, it has a very important function in AutoCAD. It will allow you to type commands into AutoCAD, and it will also give you information about commands. So this is one of the coolest things in AutoCAD. You don't have this in any other program. And if you know the name of the command, you can just click down here and you can type into it and go. And so it's a lot quicker sometimes to use this. Question? Okay. So it's a lot quicker to use this sometimes than to use, like, say, the line command. So if I know the name of the line command, I can just type in, come down here, type in an L and hit enter, and I'm actually into the command. And sometimes that can be a lot quicker than working up in here and clicking it, okay? The one thing, though, I will tell you that as we get into this, and you'll see this tonight, when you're working with a command, it's going to be echoing information down here for you. So you'll want to make sure that you spend a lot of time or some time looking down there, because a lot of times you're getting information about that. Okay? Is everybody following me so far? Are we okay?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's hard to get. I'm not getting a whole lot of feedback, but I'm sure it'll get easy. Okay, so, all right.
Sorry, I've been muting mine, that way it doesn't interrupt.
Okay, no problem. I
talking.
just want to make sure if you have a question, we need to ask, okay? Because that's the only way I'm going to know. And, you know, I can't I'm not seeing everybody, and so, okay. All right, couple of other areas, and then we're gonna start to look at a couple of concepts here. This area down at the very bottom, right above my taskbar, you have tabs here. This is called your model tab and your layout tab. So there's two dimensions that you can work in AutoCAD. What's called model space, which is the model tab. And there's only one model tab per drawing, or one model space per drawing. So that is where most of the action happens. When you go to print or plot a drawing, and you have a complex title block and other textual information, those kind of things, then you can create what's called a layout. And if you click on the layout tab, what this will do, this will take you to what's called paper space or layout space. This is a two-dimensional piece of paper, essentially. And this is where you place your title block, and this is where you plot from. So if you have a model, basically you have to open up what's called a viewport to be able to see from this space into the model space. We're not going to be utilizing this, so you won't have to worry about this at all. But I just wanted to note, because when you get into higher level types of things of AutoCAD, this is where you really do a lot of your work, for plotting particularly. Notice also one of the things that tells you you are in paper space is this icon right here. And that icon is showing you that this is the paper space world, or that's your UCS icon in paper space. So if you ever get into one of these layout tabs, not a big deal. All you got to do is click back on your model tab and you're back in business. Okay? So we won't have to worry about that. Over here, we have a group of commands. This is called your status bar in this section right here. And these are primarily little toggles that'll turn things on or turn things off. So for instance, you'll notice this guy that looks like a grid, and that's exactly what it is. If I want to turn this grid off up here, I just click on it, turns it off. So if your button is gray down here, it's turned off. If it's blue, it's turned on. And visually, you can see certain things. Sometimes you can't. There are going to be some things that we're going to be dealing with here. So we're going to have some of those turned on and turned off. Okay. If you're working with AutoCAD right now, one of the things I'm going to want you to do is add this button right here, which is probably not there. It's called your dynamic input. So what we're going to do is go over to this guy, this customization tool, open that up. And all of these things here are going to allow you to customize the status bar here. Notice if they have a check in front of them, they show up down here. If they don't have a check, then they're not available. What I would like you to do is go to the dynamic input and turn it on. Now mine's already on, so you'll notice there's a check right there, okay? So go ahead and check it, and you should see this button show up. And what we're gonna wanna do is turn that off, and that'll make it easier for you when you work in AutoCAD. So once you turn that setting off, it'll stay off, okay? So there are certain things about settings that once you set them, they're going to stay that way. And that'll probably be the most frustrating thing at first, because you'll say, I don't have that button anymore. I don't have this. And a lot of those are customization issues. So those would certainly be things that you want to talk to me about if you have questions. Okay? Are we good?
Mm-hmm. Sir.
Okay. All right. So again, recap real quick. That's your application menu, file details, quick access toolbar, name of the file that you're working in, info center. Then we have the ribbon, okay? And we have the graphical screen area, the view cube, the UCS icon, the command window, layout and model tabs, and then we have this area called the status bar, okay? So those are going to be important to know, because as we're working through this thing, I'm going to tell you, like, let's say we need to navigate to this part or this part, so you have an idea where you're going with this. Okay. I want to show you another feature that you can add if you want. Sometimes it's nice to have. If you go up to the quick access toolbar, that little drop down customization tool there, at the bottom, you'll find this one that says show menu bar. And what that'll do, that'll bring another group of menus above your ribbon. And these are the way that AutoCAD used to look way back in the original days. And these are sometimes called pull-down menus. So the thing that's nice about these is that they have everything the ribbon does, but then they have more commands. So for instance, notice my draw panel. If I go to the draw pull-down, these are the same commands essentially that you have here, except there's more commands in this than they are here. So sometimes it's nice to have that because you can find commands there that you can't find any other way sometimes. So particularly for older users like myself, I can't find everything in the ribbon. Sometimes they don't have it in there. So quite frankly, it's great to have this up, okay? If you don't have it up, it's not gonna be a problem, okay? All right, so let's talk about the functionality of the cursor. You'll notice that the cursor will change its look when it gets into different locations. So when I'm down here in the graphics screen, it's a pointer. And when I'm up here, it's a pointer. When I get down here, it becomes what they call an I-beam. So when you're in an area where your pointer like this, or like this, in fact, I'll also make you notice when I get it down here, it also looks like this, and this is what we call a crosshair. So it can look different ways, like a crosshair, like a pointer, or like an I-beam. Those have different functions. So when you're dealing with a pointer, that's mostly a selection mode, okay? When you have the crosshair, you're basically in a drafting mode. And notice that only occurs when you're down here in the graphics screen. And when you come down here in the window or another type of box where you get the I-beam tells you that you can type, okay? So pointer is selection. This tool here, the crosshair is drafting, and this tool down here is typing, okay? Also, if you're using a mouse, a 3-button mouse, your left mouse click is a selection tool. So when I come up here and click, it's going to select something. So I just select the line command by left clicking. If I right click, I get a shortcut. So this group of shortcut menus are going to pertain to what you're doing, and they are really nice because they allow you to do things quickly, okay? So kind of remember this, when in doubt, right click. And what that will allow you to do then is grab things quickly, okay? The shortcut menu will change based on what you're doing. So notice I'm not doing anything essentially right now. And when I right click, notice I get that shortcut menu. But if I'm in the middle of a command and I right click, it'll do something different, okay? So it's kind of sensitive to what you're doing, okay? The middle mouse key, if you have a middle mouse key, it's what we call zoom essentially. So if you roll the wheel away from you, I'm zooming in. If I roll the wheel toward me, I'm zooming out. If I hold the wheel down, it'll actually like what we call a pan function. So it's panning my view left, right, up, down, but it doesn't do any zoom kind of characteristic, okay? That's going to be totally different when you get into GIS because it's going to work backwards. So when I roll in AutoCAD, I'm zooming in. When you do that in GIS, you'll be zooming out. So that takes a little getting used to at first, okay? All right. Here's a good thing that you need to know also. If you ever get into AutoCAD and you get into something and you don't know what you're doing and you want to halt or stop the process, the easiest way to do that is hit your escape key on your keyboard. You just hit the escape key and it'll terminate. So notice I'm going up to the circle right here, and it's starting to do stuff down here. And I'm saying, I don't want to do that. I just hit the escape key and it cancels it. Okay. So the cancel, escape. And sometimes you maybe want to hit the escape twice because you may be 2 levels deep into a command. And so therefore, it'll allow you to stop anything or halt anything. Okay. So remember that. Let's see. A couple of things also about the keyboard. Anything that you type in AutoCAD is not case sensitive, so it doesn't matter whether you're uppercase or lowercase. Numbers, you can either use the numbers across the top or you can use your keypad. I like my keypad because I'm quicker with that than trying to find the numbers across the top. As far as entering stuff in AutoCAD, if you type something in, you can use the enter key like you would to enter any other things, but the space bar will also function as the enter key in AutoCAD. So the space bar and the enter key are exactly the same in AutoCAD until you do text. Once you do a piece of text, then the space bar will actually function like a space bar. But any other command, they're going to be the same, enter and space bar. Okay. How we doing?
Pretty good.
Good.
Information overload, right? Okay, so we're all right so far?
Yes.
Okay, so don't hesitate to ask now because we're going to start to get into some of the hard topics here. Not hard, but I mean getting into the topics here. So it's important to make sure that you stop me. Okay. I also noticed that some of you have your audio is muted, so if you want to talk to me, you're going to have to make sure you turn those on so I can't hear it. All right, I can't hear until you do. Okay. All right. So we're going to talk about a couple of concepts here associated with AutoCAD now. One is what we call an object. So an object in AutoCAD is a little graphical critter that you're using to construct your drawing from or with. So everything in AutoCAD is essentially a type of object. And so if we go over to the draw area here, the home tab, the draw panel, everything you see in here, these are considered what we call objects. So you'll notice they all are particular, they all have names. So you have a line, which just does a very simple thing like that. We have a circle, which does that. We have an arc that does that. So these little guys, these are all basically little primitive critters that you use to construct a drawing with. And each one has properties associated with it. So for instance, if we look at this line, that's a line right there. He has a length, he has a direction, and he has coordinates that associate with that endpoint and that endpoint, okay? If we look at the circle has geometry associated with it. It has a center point coordinate, it has a radius value. Okay, they also have other things. I notice if I pull this up right, let's see if I'll let that, okay. Notice it says other things. It tells me it's a circle. It shows me a color, a layer, and a line type. Those are all considered properties of this object. Okay, so the color right now says it's by layer, which means it's showing up white because the layer is white. A line type, we'll talk about all of this stuff as we get into that, but there's just different properties associated with each object type, okay? Good way of thinking about an object, a good definition for that would be a basic drawing element. And usually you may not be able to turn an object of one type into an object of another type. That's not totally true, but for instance, I cannot take and make that line into an arc, but I could break it into other lines. I could take this circle and break it into an arc, but I could not take that arc and make it into a circle, okay? So they pretty much are at their base level, okay? Everybody okay with that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so as you're drawing in AutoCAD, what you're really doing is just laying down on a palette, piece of paper, whatever, these basic objects. And as you create the size of the objects, they're going to create what are either called what we call extents or what we call limits. Okay, so extents is the collection of all of the objects that exist in your drawing. So right now, my extents is associated with that line, that circle, and that. I'm going to show you what they would essentially look like. Basically, you can consider those objects being in a rectangle, okay? So you don't see the rectangle, but notice how that basically fills my screen. So this is essentially my extents right here, okay? As I change the size of objects or delete objects, so if I delete that object and I delete that object, my extents have now changed. So that's my extents now, okay? So essentially, if you have no objects, you essentially have no extents, but that's not 100% true the way AutoCAD will look at it. But you can think of that's kind of a way of thinking about it. So again, extents is just a collection of all the objects that exist in your drawing, and you can plot your extents or you can zoom your extents. So those are kind of important concepts right there. Now there's another one called limits, and I want you to notice I'm going to type in the word limits. So I'm typing right now, and if you're following along with me, you can just do that too. Type in the word limits and then hit enter, and it will tell you now at the bottom of your screen to specify lower left corner or on off, and then it has these guys over here. So these guys are called sub options, and this one right here, that bracket, when you see that bracket and that bracket, these are called default values. So what it's showing me currently is that my limits is set to 0, 0 on my lower left corner. And that means this area right here is at 0, 0. So if I accept that by just hitting enter, it wants to know my upper right corner, and it says that's at 12, 9. So that's going to be somewhere about over in this direction. So if I do something like that. So limits is a way of doing exactly what it says, limiting the size of your drawing. So if you're working on an 8.5 by 11 size sheet of paper, you can set up your limits and then to 8.5 by 11, and then make sure that you can't draw outside of that. So in order to do that, if I did that, go back into limits, I have to turn limits on, okay? Once I turn limits on, it will not let me draw outside of it, okay? So limits, to be honest with you, most people really don't use in AutoCAD anymore. I'm going to have you probably use limits a little bit just to get used to the concept. There's a couple of things that are nice about it. The one thing is that it keeps you from drawing outside of your size of your paper if paper is a concern. Also, it's very convenient to plot. So we're not going to be plotting, but if you are doing a lot of plotting, you set up your limits. It's kind of nice. So limits is a way of locking down your X and your Y size, okay? It doesn't lock out the Z though. It will never lock out the Z, okay? And you can have limits that are different than extents. So if my limits are set to one value and my extents are set to another value, that's okay as long as my limits are not turned on. Okay, once they're turned on, then that's a different issue. All right? Are we good?
Yep.
Okay, everybody, any questions? No questions? Okay. All right. I'm gonna let's see if I can go to another view here. I have this drawing out on the Blackboard site, so you can download this or open up your Blackboard site and get to this. We need to talk about coordinates a little bit because we're going to be working with coordinate input as we get into this a little bit tonight. Okay. So AutoCAD allows you to draw with different types of coordinate systems. And I'm assuming that most of you have done something with coordinates. There's two types primarily that you're using in AutoCAD. Actually, it'll use like 5 different types of coordinate systems, but we're only going to use 2. So the 2 that we're going to use are called rectangular coordinates, and the other one are called polar coordinates. So rectangular coordinates, most people are used to, that would be like what you see right here where it says 2, 2. And what that means is you are 2 units from the x-axis and 2 units from the y-axis, okay? And all of these points, point A, point B, point C, those could all be referenced to that 2, 2 based on these distances and what would be the x and y value of this B, C, D, and E, okay? And I'm sure you've done that kind of stuff in a math class, and it depends on what your discipline is. I'm a surveyor, so I use this kind of stuff all the time. And the good news is we're not going to have to deal with it a lot, but we're going to deal with it a little bit, because if you don't ever learn this technique or this process, it really limits what you can do in AutoCAD, okay? The other type of coordinate is called a polar coordinate. And the polar coordinate's a little bit harder to use, but what it's doing is it's going to reference a distance, okay, along the line, and an angle off of the x-axis. So in AutoCAD, if this AB line represents the x-axis, then this would be in a 0 direction going this way. Notice when I go from line B to C here, it's up at a 45-degree angle. So for this polar coordinate, I would use this distance and then this angle, okay? For the polar coordinate on this one, this would be 90 degrees up at 2 units. So you have to think a little bit more when you deal with polar coordinates. And I'm going to show you how to step through this little process. We're going to do this several times tonight, and then we'll get you guys going on some of this and show you how this works, okay? So I'm going to go back to AutoCAD, and I'm going to clean my screen up, okay? So how many, I hope most of you are following along with me. If you're not, then you'll be able to get back to this. And if, of course, you have questions, then you'll just need to ask me, okay? We'll do it that way. So the one thing I had you do was add this dynamic input to your status bar. I want you to make sure that it's turned off, okay? I also want you to do one other thing. We're going to come down here and we're going to type in the word zoom, hit enter, and then the sub option all, and hit enter, okay? So what that did was fill the screen right where it needed to be, so that when we do this little process, we'll be good to go, okay? So we're going to step around this little process. We're going to go around it several different times. There are 2 types of rectangular inputs, and there's 2 kinds of polar inputs in AutoCAD. The rectangular, question?
No, sorry, my phone was buzzing.
That's all right. I thought it was, but I just want to make sure. Okay, no problem. Okay, so the rectangular input, you can have everything relative to this over here, which is 0, 0, 0. And those are called absolute coordinates. So every point has to be referenced to that. You can also then reference it from the last point, which is more convenient, okay? So if you're going an absolute coordinate, you're going to type an x comma a y value. If you're going to go a relative coordinate, then you're going to be utilizing an @ symbol, okay? So what we're going to do is step across this, around this little sample polygon, utilizing a command called line, which is this guy up here, And we're going to be inputting coordinates in order to do this because we want to get this kind of precise. Because you can eyeball points in AutoCAD, but that's not going to make it very precision. And of course, that isn't the way you would do it in the real world. Okay. So we're going to go to the line command, and it'll prompt you for a first point. So that first point is that coordinate value 2, 2. Okay. So notice I'm typing in 2, 2, and that's referencing 2 in the X, 2 in the Y. I'm going to hit enter, and you should see this thing come in like this. The point where it's fixed, which is like you've stuck a pin in that point, that is the 2, 2 point. If you pull the line out, they call this a rubber banded cursor. It functions just like a rubber band. Okay? Is that working for anybody that's following along? Okay, I guess so. All right.
I'm still trying to reinstall, sorry.
Okay, no problem. So we're going to go from point, I'm sorry, question?
How did you get that to work again? Mine's not doing that.
Okay, let me back out, okay? I'm going to start over.
Okay.
Going to hit the escape key. You need to go up to the line command, okay? Click on line, and it should ask you for a specified first point. Are you seeing that?
Hold on. Hit line. Look. Yes, I got it now.
Okay, then you type in 2, 2 and hit enter. Is that working now, Caitlin?
Yeah, now it's working. I got it.
Okay, is it work like a rubber band like mine now?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So we're going to go from point A to B. So A is 6 units in the X. So that would be 2 plus 6 gives me 8, comma 2 in the Y because we're not changing a Y direction up or down. So I'm going to enter 8, comma 2, and you should notice it goes straight across. It's a horizontal line. Okay? Is that working? Okay. So we're going to go from point B, which is where we're sitting. Question, Josh?
No,
Okay.
it's just, it looks different than how yours is set up, but it's doing the same thing.
Okay. All right. But it is doing the same thing. You're good with that?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. All right. So we're going to go from B to C now. And if we are sitting at a coordinate value of 8, 2, we're going to go over 2 in the X and 2 in the Y. So we're going to add 2 to 8, which will give us 10. And we're going to add 2 to 2, which will give us 4. Okay, so we're having to do a bit of math right now. And that's kind of the downside to this. So we're going to see there's going to be easier ways to do that. Okay, so I'm going to enter 10, 4, and go ahead and hit enter. And you should see that line go up diagonally at a 45-degree angle. Okay, is that working? Any questions?
Nope.
Okay. So we're sitting at point C on that diagram, and we're going to go up to D, and D is 2 units above. So right now we're sitting at a coordinate of 10, 4. So we're going to stay 10 in the X. So we're going to say 10, comma, and 4 is 2 units more up. So we're going to go 4 plus 2, that'll be 6. So we're going to hit enter, and that should take us up to the top like that. Are we good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So now we're going to go from D to E. So we are sitting at 10, 6. So we have to go back 5 units in the X. So we're going to subtract 5 from 10. That's going to give me 5. But there's no change in the Y, so that'll be 5, 6. And then we would hit enter. Okay. So who can tell me how we're going to get back to the starting point?
Enter the first coordinate.
Correct. That would be one way to do it. But you'll notice, if you notice down in the line command, there's an option there called close.
Ah.
All you'd have to do is hit close, and what that'll do is go back to the starting point for you automatically. So that saves you a little bit of time. The other thing it does is that it terminates the command for you. So if you typed in 2,2, you'd still be in the line command, and you would have to follow that with an enter. Okay? So that's a bit of work. It's probably more than you need to do or want to do sometimes. So there's going to be easier ways to do things in AutoCAD. But we're learning a very rudimentary way of doing it, and this is going to be very powerful as you get into things later on. Okay? So we're going to redo this. I'm going to show you, we're going to do this slightly different. We're going to use a relative input as opposed to the absolute input. So we're going to still use rectangular coordinates, but we're going to do it as a relative mode. So what I'm going to have you do is just type in the word erase, or just type in E. Actually, let's do this first. Hit the escape key just to make sure everything's canceled. Okay. Hit the E key and then hit enter, and it should say erase and select objects. Type in the word all, ALL, which means all object selection. Hit enter and then enter again, and it should delete that object group for you. Okay? Are we good?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So we're going to do the same thing, but we're going to do it a little bit more simplistic this time. So again, we're going to use this concept of relative coordinates, which means instead of being absolutely referenced to this guy over here, we're going to reference it to the last point. So it makes it simpler. Okay? Did somebody have a question? No? Okay. All right, so we're going to go into the line command. We're going to start out with an absolute value of 2,2 again. So line, specify first point, 2,2, enter. Make sure it's functioning like that. This time you're going to type in the @ symbol. So I shift and then the character 2 gets the @ symbol. We're going to tell it how much to travel in X and how much to travel in Y from the point we're sitting at. So we're going to go, if you look at my diagram, you'll notice that we are 6 units over from A to B. So I would type in 6, and then my Y value, there's no change in Y. So I'm not adding or subtracting anything to it, so I'm just going to go 0. Question, anybody? No questions?
Nope.
Okay, so if you hit the @6, 0, what you'll notice when we hit enter is it does the same thing that the last input, but we had to actually do the math. We had to add it, subtract it, and we don't have to do that if we're using this. So this makes it a little bit simpler. In fact, it's a very, very nice way of working when you're dealing with coordinates. Okay? Any questions? So we're going to go from B to C. I hear somebody talking. Is that? No? Okay. So we're going to go from B to C. So I'm going to say @2, 2. Because from B to C, it's 2 units in the X and 2 units in the Y. And again, I don't have to do the math. The @ symbol is referencing this line to the point it's coming from there. So I just type in @22, hit enter. All right. Any questions? Okay. So we're going to go up now from point C to D. we're going to say at 0 in the x, because we're not changing any x direction. And all we're doing is adding 2 units in the y. So I'm going to say at 0, comma 2, and then I'm going to hit enter. And that takes me to that point. The last input then would be at -5, because I'm going in a -5 direction for x, comma 0 for the y. And then ultimately I'm going to close this out. So I'm going to hit close. Okay. Let me stop, see if there's any questions. Questions? Nobody?
Nope.
Nope, we're good. Caitlin, you good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. Aaron, are you good? Aaron, you okay? I can't hear you. Just if you need to unmute. Adam? Okay. Okay, so we're going to do one more methodology doing this. We're going to use this thing called a polar coordinate. So this is a little bit different because you're going to be utilizing a distance, and with that distance, then you're going to be utilizing an angle as well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead. We're going to erase this guy. I hear somebody talking. Is somebody trying to talk?
It might be my kids screaming in the background.
Okay, no problem.
Sorry.
I just want to make sure I'm getting questions answered, that's all. Okay. Okay. All right, so again, we're going to erase this figure and do this one more time. And notice we've actually constructed it twice using different inputs, but we're getting essentially the same figure. Okay. So what I'm going to do again is hit the escape key, just make sure everything is terminated. Then I'm going to hit erase and enter. That gives me, or E and enter, excuse me. That takes me to the erase command. Type in the word all and enter twice. That'll take it out. Okay? So we're going to do this one more time. And again, we're going to contrast this. This is the polar coordinate method. It's probably a little bit harder for most people, but again, in my business and a lot of other types of businesses that people use this a lot, particularly mapping. So it's very important one to understand. So we're going to go into the line command and specify our first point at 2, 2 again. And hit enter. Again, we notice that's going on. Okay. So polar coordinates can be either relative or absolute, but they're almost always used in a relative mode. So relative means that you're going to use that at symbol. So we're going to use the at symbol first, and then we have to tell it the distance. So the distance that we're traveling, again, from A to B is 6 units. So 6 units. And now instead of using the comma, you have to use the less than symbol. So you're going to have to hit the shift and get that less than symbol, that guy right there. That tells you that you're in a polar coordinate mode. So now it's expecting an angle after that. So remember, the angle is measured from the x direction. And I forgot to mention this, but if you're turning the angle clockwise, it's a positive rotation. If you're turning the angle negative, counterclockwise is positive, clockwise is negative. So we're going to go 0 degrees. Okay, so that says literally from the last point, 6 units, 0 degrees. We're going to go ahead and hit enter, and that'll take that there. Okay. So now we're sitting at B. We're going to go to C. Notice we have a distance that's given on that diagram, and you have an angle. So we're going to say at 2.8284 less than 45. So the 2.8284 would be essentially the hypotenuse of that, and the 45 is the 45-degree angle. So I'm going to go ahead and hit enter, and notice it goes up because it's a positive 45 counterclockwise. If you were going down, it would be a negative 45. Okay? Any questions? All right. We're going to go now up from C to D. So I'm going to go at the distance from C to D is 2 units. The angle off of X would be a positive 90 degrees. So again, you have to kind of look at that diagram, envision this, and it's 90 degrees because it's going straight up, straight up. So at 2 less than 90, that takes me to that one. Now, if I want to go this direction, that's going to be either positive 180 or negative 180 in terms of the angle. So I could go either direction. So what I'm going to do is say at distance is 5 units less than 180. I'm going to go ahead and do that. That takes me there. And then I can close this. All right. So that one is probably the hardest type of input that you'll do. And it's nice to know all 3 of those. Like I said, eventually we're going to not be using coordinates, but initially we're going to do a little bit with those just so we get the idea of how we can do this. Okay. So let me stop here and see if there's questions. Anybody questions that they'd like to discuss? Anything to discuss? Craig, you doing all right? Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry. When you put this on YouTube for us to watch again, are you going to send out an email so that we know that it's on there?
Yeah. Once I
how are you
get
going to do that?
right, once I get the YouTube site set up, I'll send you an email and let you know it's there for sure. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, no doubt. I'm hoping to get it. Probably won't be tomorrow, but I'll try. If I'm around, if I have time tomorrow, I'll try to get it tomorrow. But Wednesday at the very latest. Okay. And then I'll just go ahead and put it under the week 1 folder so that you'll have it there as well. Okay. All right. Anybody else questions?
How do you zoom in?
Okay. There's a couple different. Do you have a mouse that you're using?
I'm on my laptop.
Yeah.
Okay, on your laptop, I'm not, because I don't use, you're just using a little pad in your laptop.
Yeah.
That's probably, that's my weakest link because I don't use, I use a mouse almost exclusively. But what you can do, you can just type in Z and hit enter, and that'll take you to the zoom command.
Okay.
All right, and there's a couple of different zooms that you can do, all right? But if you want to see your entire drawing easily, just go to the extents at the bottom, and it should just fill your screen.
Okay.
Okay, did that work for you?
Yeah, that's working for me.
Okay, now the other thing you can do, when you go into Zoom, notice you'll get that looks like a magnifying glass there. That's called a real-time zoom. So if you hit enter, let's see, I think okay, what you have to do on your pad, did you hit enter?
Yeah.
Okay, hold down one finger, like your left finger on your pad, and then take your right finger and drag it towards the top of the screen, you're zooming in. If you drag it towards the bottom, you're zooming out, okay? That's called a real-time zoom. Those will probably be the easiest way for you to zoom right now, okay? I personally really, go ahead.
No, you're good.
Okay, I personally like having a mouse because I don't like that. You have more flexibility with a mouse. Not that you won't be able to draw. You'll be fine once you get used to it. But I think it works easier for you that way. Okay. And once you get your zoom with the real-time zoom, just hit the escape key and it'll take you right out. Okay.
All right.
Did
Yep.
that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Great. Anybody else? Okay. Let me show you something here that is a little interesting to see in AutoCAD because most people have not probably ever experienced this before. We just drew this figure 3 times. And so technically, because of the coordinates that we use, they should all be the exact same models on top of each other. But I'm going to show you, let me do something here real quick. I'm going to create a layer. Just make him a new color. So the figure that I have up here, I did with polar coordinates, okay? I'm gonna redraw that using rectangular coordinates. And hold on a sec. And I wanna show you something. Okay, so I'm gonna do the at 6, 0, at 2, 2, at 0, 2, at -5, 0. So you notice that I have a red line on top of a white line. Does anybody think those are the same figures, the red and the white? They should be technically, but if you start to zoom up here, you'll notice they're slightly off. Okay. The reason this one is slightly different from this is because there's a precision issue going on in AutoCAD. AutoCAD works in 14 sig figs. And because this one was done with a hypotenuse that only had 5 sig figs, and this one was done with an explicit 2, 2, there's a little bit of a difference. And so notice when you get up even to the top, it'll come off more and more. So those issues can be very, very important when you get into AutoCAD because that can be the difference. That can actually represent a couple of feet out in the real world if you're taking this drawing and using it that way. So we kind of have to be aware of all of that. Okay. Any questions? Okay. All right, so let's go ahead and we're going to do a zoom all. So just type in the word zoom, type in the all, and I'm going to actually erase all everything I've got here. So I'm going to erase E, the word all, and then hit enter twice. Okay. All right, so one of the things that's very convenient in AutoCAD is to be able to work in units. So units come in 2 types of units in AutoCAD. We have linear units or distance type units and angular units or angle type. So to get to this command, the easiest place to do it is to just type it in. So you type in the word units and hit enter. And it should open up this guy, which is called a dialog box. So the dialog box has 2 sides to it. The length side, which is your distance, and the angle, which are angle types. And notice, under length type, there's a decimal drop down here. So there are 5 types of units that you can use in AutoCAD. Architectural, decimal, engineering, fractional, scientific. And only 2 of these actually have real-world units assigned to them. So architectural and engineering are in feet and inches. decimal, fractional, and scientific are unitless. So this means that you can use them for any purpose. So decimal could be meters, it could be miles, it could be millimeters. But if we're using architectural or engineering, then we're actually in feet and inches. Notice also if I set it to decimal, there's a precision setting, and that'll allow me to go from 0 precision up to 8 decimal places. So that's just displayed precision, not ultimate precision. So the precision actually is 14 sig figs in AutoCAD. So it works at a higher level than what it will display. So you need to keep that in mind as well. Over in the angles, you're probably used to most of these types of distance kinds, but when we get over here, we'll see there's 5 other types: decimal degree, degree minutes second, grads, radians, and surveyor's units. And we're going to work in some of these different types. Some of them I'm sure you've heard of them, some of them you haven't, but like tonight we're just working in this straight decimal degree type. So 1 revolution around the circle is 360 degrees for that. And it's just broken down decimally. And degree minutes second is like time. So you have 360 is 1 circle, and 60 minutes and 60 seconds. So the other one here called grads is more of a European type. And that is based on a circle that is equal to 400 units around it. So 1 circle in the grad system is 400 grads, where in the decimal system it's 360. Okay. So it just depends on what unit you're working in, and we're going to play with these a lot as we get into this, just so you get used to that. And for each type of unit setting, you also have these guys right here. These are precisions. Okay. One other thing I want to show you here before we leave the units box is this clockwise check. So what this does is if you turn that on clockwise, what that means is angles going clockwise are now positive, okay? So normally, most people in AutoCAD work it like this. They turn that off. That's the default settings, okay? That's your default setting. So if you check that on, it's going to be reverse. Okay. All right, any questions on that?
Nope.
Okay. You guys doing all right?
Yep.
Okay. Does anybody want to take maybe a short break, or we're okay, just go through this?
You can just go through it.
Go through it? Okay. All right. Well, just keep in mind now, I know this is a little difficult, and this is the first time I've done this online like this. So if, again, I'm going too fast or you need me to explain something, please, make sure that happens. And also do keep in mind, you will be able to contact me anytime, and I can do a Zoom session, just, one-on-one or whatever. So we can make this as easy as possible. Okay. So, so what we're going to take a look at, we've got 4 draw commands that we're going to take a look at. And once we do that, then that'll kind of free you up to be able to get started on this lab that I want you to work on. So I'm going to go through the line command first, which we've kind of already looked at a little bit. Then we're going to take a look at circle. Then we'll do rectangle, and the last object we'll take a look at is the arc command. Okay, so line, arc, circle, rectangle, they're all located over in the home tab of the draw section. Okay, there's your line, there's your circle, there's your arc, and this one up here is your rectangle. So it's kind of a buried one. It's a little bit harder to find. Notice the line doesn't have many sub options, so it doesn't have that little arrow coming down. But if we go to circle, notice there's a down arrow. These are all sub options of the circle, which we'll be going through, and I'll show you how those work. Okay. And notice that the arc also has quite a few sub options right there. Okay. So we'll be taking a look at those. So let's start out with the line command real quick. Okay. So we're going to go into the line command. So we've already seen that basically you're just supplying 2 endpoints. That's all it takes to do a line. But it does have some other features that are kind of nice that we'll take a look at. So we're not going to worry about coordinates right this minute. So all we're going to do is eyeball stuff, okay? So just go into the line command, make sure it says specify first point. Just take your cursor anywhere and left click. And again, that establishes the first coordinate of that. So what we're doing is a process called eyeballing. And eyeballing is not something that most people do. So, but notice at the command line now, it says specify next point or undo. So there's actually a built-in undo to this command. And I'll show you how this works after we get a few segments. So we're going to pick another point, and another point, and another point. And you may notice now another sub-option is shown up here called close, which we understand now what that does. But let's take a look at what undo does. If you just select undo, notice it gets rid of the last segment that I drew. I can do that again, and I can do that again. And I can even do it from the beginning and it'll take back everything. So it's kind of like erasing each line, but it's doing it sequentially backwards, okay? So again, specify point, specify point, specify point, undo, okay? So when you get a few points in, go ahead and then we'll hit the close. Notice what the close does is it goes back to the initial starting point of your line, and it also terminates the line command, okay? So those are all nice features within that line. Also, if you drew 3 segments like I did here, that's a segment, that's a segment, and that's a segment, they're all separate. So that's one object, second object, third object. So in other words, each line that you construct is its own object, okay? There will be another object type we're going to talk about next week called a polyline, where that won't be true. If you draw 3 line segments with a polyline, it's all one object, okay? So that will make a difference, okay? So if you want to get rid of what you just drew, just go ahead and type in E and enter for erase. We'll type in the word all and hit enter twice, okay? So I'll tell you where probably every drawing that you ever draw will have at least a minimum of 1 or 2 lines. So it's one of the most basic primitive objects that you'll use, and we'll be using it a lot, okay? So the next thing we're going to take a look at is the circle. And the circle is also a very simple little primitive object, but it does have what we call sub-options associated with them. So if you come over here and we drop this down, let's take a look at these. So the first object, or the first sub-option group is center and radius. So what you're going to define is the center point and then the radius value, okay? So that'll give you the circle. If we go to this guy called center diameter, you're going to define the center point and then the diameter distance. So they're basically the same process, it's just that the diameter is twice the radius, okay? So this one called 2 point allows you to create 2 points on a circle that really defines its diameter based on the 2 points distance between. So with this type of input, you don't know what your center point is, okay? So if you're really concerned where the center point of the circle is, you don't want to use this option, okay? This next one here is a really great command. It allows you to define 3 points on that circle, and it's going to pass that circle through those 3 points for you. So from a mathematical standpoint, that's a very, very complex command. So it's called the 3-point option. Then we have what's called tangent radius, which is really interesting because it allows you to just select a couple of objects and it'll be tangent, or that circle is going to be tangent to those 2 objects. So tangent means that it's only touching that circle in one spot. Again, that's a pretty high level math type of application. And then the last one we'll do is what's called a tan. And basically this is just a 3-point option that means that each object is tangent to the point that you're coming from. All right, so we're going to come up to the top here, and we're going to select center radius. Okay. So down below it says specify center point for your circle. Just eyeball a point anywhere on the screen. Pick it, and then it'll come and say, okay, specify the radius. And if you just drag your cursor out, notice you're kind of in a drag mode, and you can drag that radius value. Again, you're eyeballing it. If you want to be specific, you can come down here and you can say, I want that to be 2 units or 2.5 units, and hit enter, and that's going to be exactly that value for you. Okay, so establish the center point and then the radius. That's probably the most common use of that command. If we go to the sub option center diameter, basically it works the same way. I pick a point, and then it wants to know a diameter. Now you'll notice down here, it already has a diameter for you. That's called a default value, and is reading the last circle that we created. So notice I put in 2.5 before, twice that is 5. So if I want that value, I can just accept it by hitting enter, or I can establish my own new one and say, no, I want that to be 3 units. So that means this is 2.5 this way, and this is 3 units this way, okay? So again, circle center, radius, center diameter, 2 of the most common options. Okay, so let's take a look at 2-point. So 2-point you're not gonna use too often, not as often, but again, we're defining points on the diameter of that circle. So if I select 2-point option, you pick the first point, and notice as you drag the circle out, that first point you selected, that's kind of like again, you stuck a pin in there and it's fixed, and it wants to know the circle's diameter. Now, you can use a coordinate and say like at 5 degrees at 30 to, or 5 units at 30 degrees, again, or we could just eyeball, but I'm gonna use a coordinate, and I'm gonna say, I wanna be relative to that first point. So I'm gonna come here and I'm gonna say at, which means relative to that point, and I'm gonna say I want this to be 3 units, and I want this to be at an angle of 45 degrees. So what that did was from that first point, it made that 3 units at 45 degrees, okay? So that's probably a lot more involved than you need to get when you get into circles, but again, it's not the common type that you're going to use. Everybody doing okay so far?
Yep.
Okay, so the next one is called the 3-point. And again, this is probably from a mathematical standpoint, one of the most powerful commands, because it has to find the radius that will go through those 3 points, and it also has to determine the center point of that circle. So what we're gonna do is go to the 3-point option. We're just gonna eyeball 3 points. Pick a point, and when I pick that third point, what it did was it passed that circle through those 3 points. So there was a point over here that I picked, a point over here that I picked, and that point. So it had to find, in order to solve that, it had to figure that point out right there, and it had to determine that distance, okay? And that's, again, very, very high level calculation. Great command. You're not gonna use it all that often, probably, but there's a lot of things that you can do with that, as I'll show you here in a minute. Okay. All right, so let's go ahead. We're gonna clean the screen up real quick. I'm just gonna have you, what you might wanna do is do a zoom. So we're gonna type in the word Z, or the letter Z, and hit enter. And then you can type in A or E, either extents or all. And then we're gonna erase everything. So we're gonna erase E, all, enter twice, okay? So I'm gonna draw 2 lines, okay? I'm gonna take this line and I'm gonna bring that line up here, and then I'm gonna bring him right here. So I'm gonna just make a real acute angle, and when you're done with those 2 lines, just hit enter. So that'll terminate that line command for me. Okay. So we're going to use these two lines so that we can construct a circle that is tangent to those two lines. And we're going to use that option called tangent radius. So we're going to go to circle, tan radius. And it wants me to specify a point on the object for the first tangent. So you have to have an object out here. You can't just pick its space. So I'm going to come over here and pick that line. Don't worry about where you pick it. But notice when you select that or get near it, it'll jump out and it'll say deferred tangent. So once you see that, you can just hit left click, come over to the other line, left click, and then it wants to know your radius value. So let's not make your radius too big. Let's make it like 1 unit and hit enter. And what you should notice by doing that is it placed that circle tangent to this and tangent to that. Now what that means, again, if you zoom up on here, that this line is only touching that circle in one spot. That's what we mean by tangent. If it's picking or hitting that line twice, that's called a secant. So what we have is a tangent option. And so it made that again, a lot of high level math going on there, okay? Did everybody see how that worked?
Yep.
Okay, so we're gonna do one more circle. And this circle is called the tangent, which basically is a 3-point circle. So if you got yours to work like mine, then you have this object, and this object, and we can be tangent to those three. So we're going to come here, tan, and again, select the first line, select the second line, select the circle, and you should now see another circle there. And again, it is completely tangent to that object, to that object, to that object. So it is a 3-point circle, but it has a secondary spec on it that's saying it needs to be tangent to each condition. And that's a great little routine. And you can see, if you're not able to follow along with me right now, when you get a chance to play with this, you'll see how powerful that is. Does anybody questions?
Nope.
We're all doing all right? Very hard to tell from my end, so I'm hoping this is coming through okay. Okay. So let's go ahead again, just recap this real quick because there's options here. Center radius, center diameter, 2-point, 3-point, tan radius, tangent. I want to show you something slightly different. If you type in the command, you get slightly different input. So if I type in the word circle or its alias, which is C, I can just hit C and hit enter. Notice it brings up the circle command. And you'll notice there's your center point, radius, diameter, 3-point, 2-point, TTR, but they don't have TTT in there. So TTT is only available if you use the pull down like that, okay? Otherwise, if you're typing it in, you won't see it. So that's something nice to know, okay? All right, so let's go erase everything we've got here. We're just gonna type in E and hit enter for erase. So you may have to hit the escape key first. So hit the escape just to kill everything. E, enter, and the word all, and enter, and then enter again, okay? All right, we're gonna take a look at the rectangle command. So this command actually generates what's called a polyline, okay? So it actually generates this kind of object right here, a polyline, and it'll create what's called a 2D polyline. So what we'll notice when we do this is that this object isn't really a rectangle. It's actually a polyline, but it'll have 4 objects associated with it, or it might have more than that, depending on how you draw it, but they'll all be one object, okay? So if we go over here and select this is your rectangle. And notice it has quite a few sub-options. So specify first corner, or what we call a chamfer, elevation, fillet, thickness, and width. And I'll show you all of these here in a sec. So what we're going to do is just pick a point And then you're going to pick a second point. So what you're defining is the diagonal distance from corner to corner of your rectangle. So once you pick the second point, you get a nice simple rectangle. If you click on this thing, you will notice that it is all one object, okay? Unlike if you did that with 4 lines, you would have 4 objects. With this type of object, this polyline, what you have is one object, okay? Somebody get that to work?
Mhm.
If you selected it like I did, just go ahead and hit the escape key, and you can keep it as an intact object. Okay, so if we look at the rectangle command again, notice there are what we call width. And width will allow us to take this thing and pull it out this way and this way. So in other words, make the lines thicker, okay? And in drafting terminology, when you make a line thicker or darker, that's called giving it line weight. So what we're doing in this polyline, we're going to give it width. So we're going to choose this width option, where you can just type in W, and it wants to know the width, okay? So this is the way the width works. It's going to pull that thing out in this direction and in this direction, and whatever you give it, it's going to be equidistant either side. So if I type in 0.5 for my width, it's going to make the width 0.25 this way and 0.25 that way. So what we're going to do is pick a point and pull it out and click a second point, and you'll notice now this guy has width where this guy does not, okay? And the width, the edge of it really doesn't exist. It's just the way it looks. If you click on this object, you'll notice these little blue boxes. Those are called grips. That's where the actual geometry of that is. So there's no geometry here or here or here or here. It's only in the center, okay? Has everybody seen how that works? Any questions? No questions?
Nope.
Okay. All right, so on this particular, did somebody have a question? On this particular object, once you set that width, it remembers that width. So if you don't want that width on, you're going to have to go into the width option and set it back to a 0 value. Okay? So we're going to leave it on for now. We're going to do another one here. So we're going to go back to this rectangle. Notice when you do that, down here it tells me that the width is permanently right now set to 0.5. So again, if I want to change that, I could do that. Okay. We're going to give it what's called a fillet this time. And so what a fillet is it's going to take this corner and it's going to round it off. So what you're doing is putting an arc that goes right from there to there, and it's going to round it around 4 different little corners. So we're going to go into the fillet option. And notice the radius is currently set to 0. Let's set that to 0.5 as well and hit enter. Pick 2 points. And notice you may have to make it big enough, but once you get it big enough, you'll notice that this one has now rounded corners where that has sharp corners. Okay. So what it actually did here, it was constructed a line, an arc, a line, an arc, and it's just done that all the way around. So you actually have 8 objects on this as opposed to just the 4. But again, if you click on it, it's all one object. Okay. The last one we're going to look at is what we call a chamfered rectangle. So if we go to the rectangle here, there's a chamfer option. So what chamfer does, it takes this corner and it notches it off just across like this. So it takes and cuts it straight as opposed to this, which has an arc in it. Okay, so we're going to go to the chamfer option, and we're going to give it a distance of, let's say, 1 unit for the first chamfer, 1 unit for the second chamfer. And we're going to pick 2 points again. And notice there's your chamfered rectangle with width, your filleted rectangle with width, your width rectangle, and your width rectangle that has no width. Okay. Again, this command is probably not going to be used too much, but it is nice if you want to draw something very quickly, like a 4-sided figure like that. Now, one interesting thing about these guys, because this is a polyline, this polyline can have width where other object types can't. Like the line command will not take on a width. The circle will not take on a width, but this guy will. But if we make it a non-polyline, it'll lose that width. So what I'd like you to do is click on one of those objects that has width, just like that, and you should see, you get those blue boxes and it kind of highlights. And we're going to come up to here to the modify, and we're going to find this guy right here that's called explode. And if you explode that thing, it's going to blow it apart, and you'll notice it lost the width. And notice you have that line, that arc, that line, so it's all separate. So it's no longer a polyline, and when you did that, it also lost the width option. Okay? You guys still with me?
Yep.
Okay. Any questions on that?
I don't think so.
Everybody okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right, like I said, now I know that we're going a lot, and I don't know how many people are following along with me on AutoCAD. So when we get these things posted, make sure that you look back on this and try to go through it, and I think it'll be really helpful. The other thing I would say too that you'll find if you Google anything like how to draw a line, how to draw a circle in AutoCAD, you're going to find probably a gazillion different YouTube videos out there that can be really helpful. So, but also I certainly want you to know that you can contact me if you need that, okay? So any questions then, if there's no questions, we're gonna go ahead and move on to the last object type, which is called the arc. Now, the arc is probably one of the more complex objects, and it's a little bit harder to draw sometimes. So what I'm gonna do is let's make sure we get just this whole screen cleaned up. So I want you to just hit the escape key, type in the letter E, and hit enter. So it's going to erase objects for me. Have you type in the word all and hit enter twice. Okay. And if you want to follow that up with a zoom all, you can just type in Z, enter, A, enter, and we're back in business. Okay, so the arc is, for most people, is probably one of the more complex objects, and myself included. I use arcs a lot in my business, but to deal with them is just a lot. Now, you would look at it and think, well, they're not that much more complex than a circle, but they're quite a bit more when you get into it. So I'm going to draw a really quick arc here. I'm going to explain a couple of things about it. So I'm just going to draw this arc real quick, and that's simply what an arc looks like. So essentially all it is a piece of a circle, but it has parameters like quite a bit. So for a circle, when you define a circle, you really just need a center point and a radius or a diameter. So you really just need 2 parameters. So with an arc, to define it properly, you need a minimum of 3. And that's why you have all of these little sub options here, okay? And notice they're all 3 options: 3-point, start, center, end, start, center, angle. So everything is using 3 as a minimum of 3 options, okay? So let's take a look at some of this, because there's arc terminology here, and I'm going to just kind of go through this with you so you can see this. So if I click on this arc, okay, notice I get a grip box here, 1 here, and 1 here. So these are some of your simple defining points. So this guy would be called your start point. This is called your center point. and this is called your end point. And arcs always want to draw counterclockwise from the start point to the end point. So if I drew this one first, and then that one second, and that one third, my arc would actually be down here, which we would call the major arc. So what I have right now is what we call the minor arc, okay? So there's three options: start, center, end. Okay, the distance between the start point and the center point, or the start point, or the end point rather, and the start point, that's called your radius, or it's also the distance from the center point to any point on the arc. So that's a distance value. Notice you can use a distance, there's a radius value in a couple of these. So you'll notice there's a radius option. So there's not too many that use the radius option. Okay. So the other option that you have is a straight shot distance from the start point to the end point. And that is referred to as a chord. And in AutoCAD, they call it a length. So if we go here, notice there is a length option. That's your chord. Okay, again, that's not used too often, but that would be talking about the distance from here to here. And we also have what's called an angle or an included angle. So if I drew a line from that point to that point to that point, this angle from that line to that line is referred to as the included angle. And if you go this way with the included angle, that would be a positive angle. And if I go this way from the, that way, that would be a negative angle. So again, if you look at the arc, you'll notice there's quite a few angle options. There's an angle one, there's an angle one. So there's quite a few that utilize that. And then there's another option here that's called a start direction. The start direction would be a line. So for instance, if I come in like that, that line would be my start direction. The arc would come off of the end of that thing, and it would be tangent to that point. Okay, so for instance, if I did this kind, okay, that's your start direction. That arc was coming in tangent off of that. So arcs are very complex, I'm going to tell you that. And I will also tell you this, we're going to only use the arc on probably this first assignment. And after we do that, we're going to see there's going to be way better ways to do the arc. So we really won't be utilizing arc command much, but I do want you to have a little of appreciation for it. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to do a couple of arcs here, and I'm going to want you to draw an object for me. So let's go ahead and follow this. What I'm going to do is go ahead and we'll do a zoom all. Okay, so we're going to type in escape first, Z, enter, A, enter. Okay, and we're going to draw a line that's going to start at coordinate 2, 2. So I'm going to start at coordinate 2, 2, and I'm going to make this line 5 units long, and I want it to be parallel with the X. So we're going to go into the line command, type in 2, 2. Should put me right there. And I'm going to use the @ symbol, go 5 units in the X, comma 0 in the Y. And we're going to get out of this. So 2, 2, at 5, 0. So that point is sitting over here at 7, 2. So if we wanted to attach an arc to this, okay, we have to know what that coordinate value is. So I just told you that we're sitting at 7, 2 with this. And let's assume that we want to put this arc in, so it's going to go this way, and it's going to go 90 degrees this way. Okay, so I'm going to show you a couple techniques we could use. So we're going to choose what's called a start, center, end arc. Start, center, end. So the first thing it's going to want to know is the coordinate of this value. So if you click over that and you get that little green symbol that'll pop up, you can just click on that. If you don't have that symbol pop up, you can just type in 7, 2, because that's the point that we're at. Okay. So at this point, it's now asking you for the center point of the arc. So assuming that our arc is going to be up in this direction, it's going to be sweeping around like this. I want my point up like this. The only thing we would need to know is the radius. So I'm going to say that the radius in this arc is 1 inch. So my radius is 1 inch. So what I'm going to do is say I'm going to go 0 in the x and 1 unit in the y. So what I'm telling it is to go from the point I'm sitting at, not in an x and y direction, just purely y rather. So I'm going to enter that. And what that did was defined the center point. So now I'm sitting right there. Now it wants to know my end point. So if my end point is got a 90-degree angle here, all I need to do then is tell it at 1 unit in the x, comma 0 in the y. So what we did was define that point, we defined that point, and we defined that point. And you can see just defining those 3 points is not simple, okay? If anybody would probably agree with me on that, that's probably true. That's just not a simple process. But there are some cool things we can do with arcs. So one of the things we can do is once we've constructed this arc, and if we want to draw a line tangent to this, there's a really cool option in the line called the line continue option. So all you have to do is go into the line command now. When it asks you to specify first point, all you have to do is hit enter, and it'll make that line tangent off of that arc. And notice all you need to do now is tell it how long you want that line to be. So if I just tell it, let's say 5 units, I would type in 5 and hit enter. And then I can hit enter again, and it made this line perfectly tangent to that arc. And that's what you normally want to do. Arcs are very, very difficult. So if I want to put another arc tangent to this, I can go into the arc command. Notice there's an arc continue. And we would just come over and we can specify the endpoint. So if I wanted to do another 1 inch by 1 inch arc, or radius rather, I could say at 1, 1 and hit enter. So the arcs would probably, of all of the objects that we've talked about tonight, they are absolutely the hardest. And so that's going to make it a bit difficult. But again, we're not going to be utilizing arcs all that much. So that's the good news. Okay, I'm going to, let's see. I'm going to pause.